In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to add textures to our Maya materials. Alright, so essentially we're going to pick up right where we left off in our previous lesson, where now we started to come in and add some really simple materials to something like this vase. Now, what if we wanted to come in and begin adding things like textures? So we actually had some kind of a textured surface that we wanted to place around this. How would we actually go about doing that inside of Maya? Now, there's a couple of different ways of going about this, but the method that I'm going to show you is probably one of the more straightforward ways. So what I'm going to do is select this vase, or the object that has the material on it that I actually want to apply some kind of a material to, and I'll go ahead and press Ctrl-A on my keyboard to open up the attribute editor. I'll go ahead and go into this vase material that we had created in our previous lesson. Now, when it comes to adding textures to any of these different attributes like the color, transparency, or so on and so forth, what we can do is look at any of these attributes that have this little button next to it, this little checkerboard icon. Now, this little checkerboard icon means that we have the ability to plug some kind of a texture into this attribute. So let's say I actually wanted to give this color something like a texture. So we can go in, click this little checkerboard icon, give this just a second, and now we can come in here and begin choosing the actual texture that we want to use. Now you can see that Maya has a bunch of different textures that we can choose from, and again, we won't necessarily talk about all of these. If you do want to learn more about these different texturing types, you can learn more about these in our Maya rendering nodes reference courses. So let's say we wanted to plug in something like a checker just for the sake of demonstration. So let's go ahead and plug in checker. Alright, and now if I have the 6 key pressed on my keyboard, we can see the actual result of that texture that's been applied to this vase. Now if we wanted to, if we take a look at this new vase material, or it's the same vase material, but now you can see that this checker texture has been applied to it. And if you take a look at this color attribute, you'll notice that this little slider here is grayed out, and you can see that this icon is now a little bit different. You can see instead of having this little checker icon like all the rest of them do, we have this icon that is sort of a little box with an arrow pointing in on it. This button means that there is currently some kind of a texture or something that is connected into that attribute. Now if we wanted, we could just follow that connection by just clicking on the button, and that will actually take us to the actual texture that is currently plugged in. So you can see here's our checker pattern, and we can come in here and begin adjusting things like the color of that checker pattern if we choose to. And we can see that updating here on our vase material. Now what you'll notice is that currently this really does not look like a very clean checker pattern. You can see that there are distortions and stretching and things like that. And this is due to a problem with what are called UVs on our surface. Now the UVs will essentially control just how this texture is being wrapped and applied to this surface. Now once we start to get into really complex geometry, you're going to start to run into UV issues like what we have currently, where we have lots of stretching and pinching and things like that. Now very simply, we can come in and start to fix this by actually manually assigning some kind of a new texture projection onto this surface. And essentially that's going to tell Maya in a manual way exactly how we want these textures to be wrapped onto this geometry. So to do this, we want to make sure that we have some kind of a polygon object currently. And if you're unsure about whether or not this is a polygon object, go ahead and just right click. And if you start to see components like face and vertex and edge, that means that you are currently dealing with a polygon object. That's going to be very important for what we're about to show in our next step. So with this polygon object selected, let's make sure we're currently in the polygons menu. And with that selected, let's go up to create UVs. And because this is some kind of a cylindrical object, or this object is pretty close to a cylindrical shape, I'll just start with a cylindrical mapping method. And now what this will essentially do is try to unwrap this object and try to kind of wrap these textures around in more of a cylindrical fashion. So you can see now if I right click on this object and go back to an object mode, deselect that, now you can see that these textures are being wrapped around in a much cleaner method. So you can see now how this is eliminating a lot of that stretching and a lot of that distortion that we had previously. So this is just a very, very simple way of learning how we can start to work with textures. Now if you want to learn more about UVs and exactly what they are and how we can start to work with these in a much more controlled manner, we actually do have an entire course dedicated to working with UVs in Maya. So again, if you want to learn more about this process, by all means, feel free to watch that course. So for now, that's a look at how we can start to apply textures to our Maya surfaces, as well as controlling how those textures are being mapped across our geometry.